Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Michelle Morris, and I am with Consolidated Planning Group. We host these webinars 2 or 3 times a week, and we love that you come. So thank you so much for watching, for spending this hour-ish with us, whether you're watching live or on our YouTube channel or listening on our podcast, whatever it is, we really appreciate you being here. And hopefully you're going to get some good information that is going to uh, help you, something you can take along with you and implement right away for your family. Today, we're going to be talking about effective parenting techniques for your neurodiverse child. We have got Dr. Garcia with us today, and I really appreciate you being here too, Dr. Garcia. So thank you so much for that. A couple of things, just little things before we get started. I don't want to take up too much of her time. We do record every single webinar that we do, and we put them on our YouTube channel. So if you are unable to stick with us today, or if you ever want to go watch any of our other topics, you can just go to our YouTube channel. Now, since you've registered for today's webinar, or if you've registered for today's webinar, we will email you a copy of the slides along with a link to that recording so you can watch it again later. Please feel free to share these with anyone that you know who might benefit from this information. We do work all across the United States, so you can feel free to share our information with anybody that you know. The other thing I want you to know is that we are in webinar mode, so I cannot see or hear the participants. But if you put any questions or comments in the chat box, I love that. I love seeing where everyone's from. And we will get to those questions and comments um, later on or throughout the webinar as we see them come in. So a little bit about Consolidated Planning Group. We are a special needs financial planning firm. We're located just outside of Houston, Texas, and we serve families all across the United States. We've been doing this for over 30 years, and almost every single client we have has a loved one in their life with some kind of intellectual or developmental disability. Our why behind this is because all four of the financial advisors who work at Consolidated Planning Group have children or have worked with children in the past who have needs. Um, so not only can we help you with anything that any traditional financial advisor would do, like securities, investments, life insurance, retirement planning, business planning, all of that range of stuff, but we also take the extra time and have the extra knowledge in terms of helping special needs families understand future cost of care planning, benefits, SSI, Medicaid, Medicare, SSDI, what resources are available to you, and things of that nature. We are members of the Special Needs Planning Academy. We are also chartered special needs consultants and uh, nationally certified as Social Security advisors. I forgot where I was for a second there. So we truly, help families with things like protection plans, lifetime care planning. We talk a lot about transition planning, ABLE accounts, and the difference between different kinds of accounts that you can have for your loved one and not jeopardize their benefits. And again, we're here to advocate for you and to educate you. If it feels like it's been very difficult for you to find answers and to find experts in this field, that's because less than 0.1% of all of the financial advisors in the United States focus on special needs planning the way that we do. There's fewer than 200 firms in the US who do special needs planning. So you're definitely in the right spot when you're listening to us. We are experts in the area. A couple of bits of things to think about, some quick advice from us before I let Amy take over, Dr. Amy Garcia. We know that it keeps you awake at night worrying about your child and about who's going to take care of your child when you can't do it anymore. So we want you to know that First of all, the earlier you start down the road to planning for this, the better. You're going to have a longer runway to make small little adjustments that are going to really set you on the right path. And it's important to get those things set up. There's many things that you actually need to make sure that you take care of. Some of them are before your child is 18. Some of them are things you need to do right away. And some of them have a vague deadline, like, oh, it's no problem. You just need to do this before you pass away. If you know when you're going to pass away, then you can wait. But if you don't know, you really need to start doing this stuff right now. Think about what's going to happen after high school. There are educational options after high school, residential options, vocational work programs, options like that. And there's day programs and transition programs as well. So, what might be best for your loved one is not going to be best for everybody. And you need to start getting a plan in place, touring those different communities and organizations and programs to see if they would be a good fit for you and your family. And if they are, so that you have time to see if there's a waiting list. And then finally, we always recommend that you just think long and hard about appointing a sibling as a successor caregiver because that can create a lot of friction on both sides of that equation. Maybe the sibling who is going to be in the role of caregiver is feeling a little bit of an obligation to you to take care of their loved one, or they feel like they've bitten off more than they can chew when the time actually comes. They've got their own career and family and children and things going on. And the loved one with differences, they might feel a little bit resentful too, because here's their best friend, their sibling, their partner in crime, who is now stepping into role of caregiver. And that might feel a little bit like they're trying to be in charge or trying to act like mom. Well, that can create some tension as well. So just be careful with those things. Think about that before you just leave things up to a sibling. But today, like I said, I want to be quick and just get through this so that we can listen to Dr. Amy Garcia. She has got some fantastic information for us regarding how to effectively parent your neurodiverse child. So, Amy, I'm going to let you take over. Again, please, everybody, put your questions and comments in the chat box. And Amy, I will let you know if I see stuff come through.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for having us. But yes, so today we'll be talking about effective parenting techniques for the neurodiverse child. So I'll introduce myself. We'll talk a little bit about what autism is, what neurodiversity is, and then I'll pass it to my doctoral intern, Carmen Ibarra, to give us some concrete skills and strategies for parenting neurodiverse children of all ages. So I recognize this is a webinar, but anytime I give a presentation, I like to be direct about social expectations, right? We've been doing these for almost over 5 years now, right? But if we expect other people to be direct with our neurodiverse, loved ones, then I should do the same. So obviously, you have your cameras off, but feel free to drop questions in the chat. I know I personally don't like to be lectured at for 16 minutes straight. So feel free to drop things in I think there might be a Q&A, but also just directly in the chat. I also recognize that this webinar, it is recorded, but this is a safe space. This is a judgment-free zone right here. I really appreciate your vulnerability in talking about parenting techniques. Because as a toddler mom myself, I wonder, do I know what I'm doing? And I learned this in school. So I really appreciate your vulnerability in discussing some of these things. I also did want to make the disclaimer, this is for educational purposes only. So if I do give, if you ask a specific question, we're not establishing, right, a psychologist-client relationship, but I hope to be able to give you some tips and solutions as best as I can. Okay, so just briefly, so anytime I talk to key stakeholders in the autism and neurodiverse community, I always like to center myself. So I've also been a part of this community for ever since I was born, actually. So my older sister, she's 18 months older than me to the day. She was diagnosed with pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. So in today's language, that would be autism. And so growing up, I kind of always knew what autism was. I didn't think it was a bad thing. I know I was a social skills trainer and a feeding therapist. I got her to try ice cream for the first time, and now we both love it, although it does hurt her tummy now. But I was in that role in this community for a long time. Still am today. I went to Purdue for undergrad and studied psychology, got involved with some of the amazing autism research that goes on there, and then pursued my PhD in school psychology. Graduated from the University of Houston in 2022, and continued to, develop more professionally in this autism world. So now I'm a licensed psychologist, assistant professor at the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston, in our Lifespan Autism Clinic. And so in my role now, I mainly do assessments for autism for people of all ages. So I see pretty much ages 0 to 100. So if your child needs an autism evaluation, I get a lot of parents after, maybe their child was evaluated and they say, you know what, now that I've learned about autism, this might be me too. So, this work is very important to me, both personally and professionally too. So that's just a little bit about me. Yes, that's right. Okay, so now that you know about me, I know I recognize, right? You probably all know what autism is, but anytime I talk about autism with parents, I like to make sure that we're on the same page about what it is, because we need to make sure that, we're both talking about the same thing. So autism to me, right, is it's just a different way of developing, the fancy word. Oh, hi Judy, it's good to see you. It's a neurodevelopmental difference. So that just means that your brain has developed differently. And we know that the prevalence rate is increasing. Now it's in 1 in 36 US children. For adults, it impacts a little over 2% of the US population. We know there is a difference between incidence and prevalence. So it's not that autism itself is necessarily increasing. It's because we have expanded the definition of autism. We've increased access to services. So there are more and more professionals who do autism evaluations for people of all ages, which is awesome. We also know that autism impacts all racial and ethnic groups pretty equally, but disparities in timing of autism diagnosis exists. White children are more likely to be diagnosed earlier, whereas African American or Black children are more likely to be diagnosed with other things, first like ADHD or ODD. But we know that autism can be reliably diagnosed by 2 years of age. So I do get the occasional little, we call them the littles, but we can diagnose autism at any age, right? And I see a lot of the school age and teenagers and adults too. And I always try to tell parents, I truly believe that parents and kids come into my office, there's a reason for it. If, for whatever reason your child was diagnosed later in life, that's, it's try not to feel guilty about it. There are some reasons that may happen, right? Maybe there are more medical things that need to be addressed first, or it's just a more complicated case. So I always try to tell that as well. Autism is just a different way of developing, right? That impacts 2 major areas. So it impacts the way that you communicate and interact with people. And I say, and process the world around you. So that's instead of the presence of restrictive and repetitive patterns of behaviors and interests. So socially, we see something called differences in social emotional reciprocity. Basically, this is what it's like to have a back and forth interaction with you. So if you were there for your child's autism evaluation, right, the examiner may have been playing pretend back and forth with them as they get older, right? It's what is it like to have a back and forth conversation with you? So, right, if you are non-autistic, speaking with an autistic person, you might get frustrated, right? Why aren't they asking me about the thing that I want to talk about? So that's why we see those differences in social emotional reciprocity. We also see differences in nonverbal communication. So, right, they may have reduced eye contact, which again, if you grew up, being reminded, hey, look at me when I'm talking to you, that means you respect me, right? It's not that an autistic person doesn't respect you or isn't listening is that eye contact can be really, really uncomfortable. I've had adults say it's even painful. We also see sometimes flatter facial expressions, right? So it may be hard to read the emotions of your child until it's 100 rather than 20, you know? And then we also see differences in developing, initiating, and maintaining relationships. So this can look like all the way to being what we call aloof, right? But a lot of folks with autism want friendships and they want relationships. So it's understanding that there needs to be a reciprocal part of relationships, right? We care for each other. Here's my role in the relationship, and here's the other person's role in the relationship. For the RRBs, we see areas of intense interest, right? So there's some research on what the common areas of interest are. I actually looked it up. And of course, right, it's like video games, animes, but for girls and women, it's actually psychology and autism, which is kind of interesting. We also see repetitive motor mannerisms or a stimming. I hear a lot of parents call it stimming, which it is. So they can look like a lot of different things, right? Whole body rocking, flapping, even more subtle hand and finger posturing movements, things like that. We also see this insistence on sameness. So this can look like a couple different things. And let me know if you've experienced some of these. So this can look like, right, difficulties with changes. Some people love changes and routine and love traveling and they love the chaos of change. I'm also not one of those people. So for people with autism, right, change can be really, really impactful. We also see black and white thinking, right? So if we're trying to talk about emotions, right, there's a lot of gray when we're talking about emotions. So it can be really hard and confusing for folks on the autism spectrum. It can also look like a strong sense of justice. So for littles, sometimes we see like they'll correct the behaviors of other students because they're, hey, you're not following the rules. But you know, that can also be a strength as well. Then we see sensory differences. So sensitivities to bright lights, loud sounds, clothing textures, food textures, as well as sensory seeking behaviors. So looking at things really closely or the sides of your eyes, things like that. So that's how I define autism. Feel free to drop in the chat, you know, what autism means to you as a parent, and I'll kind of keep going. Okay, so now that we're on the same page about what autism is, I was the next little building block to this presentation, right, is let's talk about neurodiversity. What is this? So neurodiversity is this idea, you've heard me say a lot of differences, right? Maybe when you've read your children's reports or you're talking with other providers, right? It's a lot of like deficits and here are the problems and the difficulties, which, you know, I do want to say I'm not trying to minimize. There are deficits and problems, and sometimes the features of autism can be really, really impactful, right? But when we think about this framework of neurodiversity, autism is just a different way of developing, and we need all types of development to make the world go round. So the term was coined originally by Judy Singer. So she's an autistic woman who wrote a master's thesis on her own experience with having family members on the autism spectrum, and then her own experiences in like autistic like online forums. A more recent article came out that really this idea of neurodiversity, right, that autistic people is just their brains have developed differently. It's not a bad thing that needs to be cured or changed, was developed collectively by autistic self-advocates. And this idea of neurodiversity comes from the idea of biodiversity, right? So we need all types of plants and animals, and, you know, ecology and environments in this world. And I truly believe that we also need all types of brains. You know, neurodiversity also applies to autism, ADHD, learning disorders, right? That these are all naturally occurring variants in human neurology. Yeah, thank you, Ashley. And so on the side here, you'll see the rainbow infinity symbol. And so Judy Singer, I believe, actually created this symbol to represent autism. But sometimes you'll see like a gold infinity loop because the shorthand on the periodic table for autism is AU. Which we know, right, in schools, that's AU too. So that's what neurodiversity is. Yeah, and I see in the chat, Josephine, you said, you know, autism to you also means fixation with things, right, every day, all the time. And that can happen too with these areas of intense interest for sure. Just some key topics when talking about autism in this framework of neurodiversity. So the big thing is camouflaging, which I don't know if all of you have heard of this, right? I know it's becoming more and more not a hot topic, but kind of a hot topic, especially on social media, right? So this idea of camouflaging or masking, it's basically the difference between the person's internal experience of their autism and what it actually looks like on the outside. So they've learned ways to mask or kind of pass as neurotypical in social situations. And what this can look like is like suppressing repetitive behavior. So sitting on your hands to hide like repetitive hand and finger movements or imitating neurotypical behavior. So if I see this with all ages, especially with girls, looking at or watching peers that they consider like neurotypical models, right? And trying to imitate their behaviors. So like smiling and nodding along, things like that. It can even look like, trying to stop yourself from talking about your intense interests, right? We know that camouflaging, unfortunately, kind of has pros and cons, right? It's almost an adaptive strategy to kind of survive in this neurotypical world that we live in, right? We're not, unfortunately, a lot of the places that we are, right, are not super kind to neurodivergent or autistic folks. So people may engage in camouflaging to gain friendships or relationships or avoid punishment, right? So avoiding being teased or bullied. But we know, yeah, exactly. So my teenage daughter struggles with this right now. Yeah. But right, she's doing it for a reason, trying to fit in or appease her peers, right? But research shows that camouflaging, right, it's exhausting. Because you're trying to pretend to be something you're not, so it can literally lead to physical exhaustion or extreme anxiety. Or I've heard a lot of parents say, like, once their kid comes home, it's just like, either they'll go to their room and just, I don't know, they'll unmask, or they'll come home really angry, right? Because they've used all of their executive functioning, so that front part of their brain, to like regulate. And so then once they go home, they lose that ability to regulate. So just, to let you know that if that's your experience, you are not alone. So another kind of key topic is this double empathy problem. And this was named by Dr. Damian Milton in 2012. So the basis of this theory is that there's a mismatch, between two people that can lead to a faulty communication. So when we think about communication and social skills, right, it's a lot of like we're teaching autistic or neurodivergent folks ways, here are the social skills that you need to learn. But it's not just on the autistic person, it's also on the non-autistic person to understand each other. So that's where the communication breakdowns happen. Okay, so, in my job, I'm evaluating for autism, right? Which, I'm having to say, here are the deficits, here are the problems in order to say, yes, it's an autism spectrum disorder. But I always like to emphasize strengths too. So, you know, if what are some of your, favorite things about your child? Feel free to drop them in the chat. But what I've seen in my work, having intense interest, yes, can be frustrating, or it's like, I know, okay, you've talked to me about this all day. I'm ready to talk about something else, right? But they can actually be utilized, yes, to be really good at a certain job. We see a lot of adults, right, who are lawyers, professors, right? At some point, to get a PhD, you have to have a level of, fixation. Mine just happens to be autism. There's that. I've seen really strong attention to detail. I think in general, people with autism tend to have stronger like visual spatial skills, but that's not always the case. I see a lot of girls who have really strong verbal skills. They have incredible vocabularies, right? Things like that. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, guys. So Amber says her passion for things she's interested. For her, it's animals. That's amazing. Yeah, animals is also a really common interest too. But if you have that intense interest, right, and can hone it, because vet school is really hard. She can be a vet. That's awesome. And actually appreciate you said she's a leader and wants to be in charge, and she's also super thoughtful. So thank you for sharing those.
Thing I
So,
found is that my son, he's a musician, so that
oh,
that willingness, most kids, oh, go practice your instrument. They don't really want to. He would hear a song on the radio in the car and come home and play that song within 15 minutes and just practice it over and over and over and over and over again, which makes him a great bassist, but could be annoying a little bit when we're going through listening to that same song.
That's incredible. Yeah, we need lots of bass players. They're like the foundation of music groups. So thank you for sharing that too, Michelle. If you have any questions now, feel free to drop in the chat. We'll get to them, I think, at the end because I do want to make sure some of them may be answered as we go along. Because I'm going to pass it to my doctoral intern, Carmen, now to talk more about behavior management strategies.
So, hi, good afternoon, everyone. As Dr. Garcia said, I am a doctoral psychology intern at UT Health, but I am also a school psychologist and I've been practicing in the field of school psychology for almost 10 years. And much of my work has centered around bilingual assessments and supporting the neurodiverse community. I am also the founder of Empowered Special Education Services and Assessments. It's a small business that partners with schools to provide bilingual evaluations, consultation, and also culturally responsive special education services. Okay, so now that I introduced myself, so the guys aren't like, who is this random lady just showing up on my screen? We're gonna now shift into the core of today's topic, right? Which is behavior management. And when we talk about behavior, we're not just referring to the problems behaviors. We mean anything that's observable, any observable action like smile to a tantrum to even just completing work. And the framework that we are going to use to understand this behavior, we call it the ABC model, and we're going to get to it one by one right now. So, okay, let's go on to, okay, I'm on this slide. So an antecedent, this is anything that happens before a behavior. It's basically what we call the trigger. It's either the situation or the demand or an event that sets the stage for what's about to happen. So when we think about the antecedent, I want you all to think about or think of it as the why now, like the why now moment. Why did the behavior occur right then and not 10 minutes earlier or later? And the key idea here is that if the antecedent doesn't occur, then the behavior often doesn't happen either. So that means that if we can change or control the trigger, we can often prevent the behavior from even starting, which is a lot more easier than trying to actually manage the behavior once it's like in full swing. So like an example of this, right, might be like, okay, a child just yells during the transition from playtime to bedtime. And what is the antecedent? It's the announcement that playtime is over. And either by using a little timer or like a visual countdown, you're modifying the antecedent and preparing the child for this transition. Okay, so now let's move on to the B in the APC model. And the B is for behavior. And when we say behavior, we are talking about any action that can be observed or described. And it's important to remember that behavior is not just the bad stuff, right? There's no such thing as, oh, he's a bad kid. It includes everything a child does, from raising their hand to asking for help, walking away, or just playing quietly, or even sometimes yelling. So, in other words, behavior is a form of communication. It tells us something about what the child needs, what the child wants, or even what the child is trying to avoid. And when we look at behavior through that lens, right, as communication, we stop labeling kids as defiant or lazy or, oh, they're just bad, right? And we actually kind of start asking ourselves, like, what are they trying to tell me through this action? What are they trying to say? What are they trying to convey? And also, when we describe behavior, we want to use very objective and very neutral language. So instead of saying, oh, Johnny was just being super disrespectful, um, say or describe what you actually saw. So, like, you can say something like, oh, Johnny crossed his arms and turned away, when I asked him to finish his work. And when we do this, right, when we describe the behavior using objective and neutral language, this also helps us analyze behavior patterns without actually judging. Okay, so now that we've looked at the A for antecedent and the B for behavior, now let's move on to the C for the consequence. And the consequence is simply what happens immediately after the behavior. It's how the environment or how we respond to that behavior. And sometimes consequences are natural. A perfect example of this is if a child touches a hot stove, what's the natural consequence? Oi, they feel hot, right? They feel the pain because it's very hot. So that's a natural consequence. And that natural consequence teaches the child not to repeat that behavior. So I know I'm not going to go back to the stove and touch it because it's hot and it's going to hurt and I'm probably going to get burned. Other times, consequences are social or they can also be environmental. So these are things like being sent to timeout or getting a hug, being ignored, or receiving attention. And one of the main key takeaways of this slide is if a behavior keeps happening, something about the consequence is reinforcing it, even if it's unintentional. So this could be that the child is getting something valuable out of it, whether it's attention, escape, or access to something that they really want. Okay. So as you know, behavior is a form of communication, yes, but every behavior also serves as a function. And it's the way that it's the child's way of saying, I need something or I want something. And there's usually four common functions, and we're going to talk about them individually as we move on. But these four common functions are escape or avoidance, attention, access to tangibles, and automatic or sensory reinforcement. And it's very important that we recognize the function of these behaviors because, again, it keeps us from personalizing the behavior. And like instead of just saying he's being defiant, we can shift it to saying, well, what is he really trying to communicate? And one of like the reminders that I always tell parents that I'm working with is always ask yourself, what does this behavior get the child? Or what did this behavior help them avoid? So that's always your first clue. Okay. Now let's talk about one of the most common functions of behaviors, and that is escape or avoidance. Okay, so what does this mean? This essentially means that the child is engaging in a behavior to get away from something. And this could be anything from like a demand, a task, a situation, or even a person that, you know, he or she feels uncomfortable with. And for instance, an example, and this is a very common thing that we see in the schools. The student, let's say, has learned that if they hit a classmate, they get sent out of the classroom or they get sent home, right? Or they go to their principal's office. So while it might look like the student is just being aggressive and hitting his peers, the real motivation here is to escape the lesson, leave the classroom. So the removal from the task, which the child probably finds a little bit hard or stressful, becomes the reward that reinforces that behavior. Another example of this is, for example, if a teen refuses, you know, to like attend to a family gathering because the social situations feel very draining or anxiety provoking. Avoidance helps reduce some of that stress in the short term, but then it reinforces a pattern of escape in the long run. So essentially, this is what the child is learning. If I do this, I get out of what I don't like. Okay, so the next function of behavior that we're going to talk about is attention. This is one of the most common motivators behind behavior. So often children engage in behaviors to get a reaction or to even get an acknowledgement from others. And when we think about attention, if you guys kind of like think about it, the best way to get attention out of anyone is kind of like through negative attention. Let me misbehave so that I can get attention from someone. Because oftentimes our kiddos who behave really good, they're not given that immediate attention or that immediate praise. So remember, attention can be positive or it can also be negative. And for example, in this slide, if a child bangs their head while their dad is on the phone, the behavior, yes, it definitely may seem extreme, but it's serving a clear function. And in this case, it's to get dad's attention. So even if dad just stops talking for a moment and just says like, oh, you stop that, like stop hitting yourself, the child still achieved the goal. And that was they successfully, shifted dad's attention and moved the dad's attention from the phone to them. Or another example is, a child who makes silly noises during dinner and the siblings laugh. And I'm sure this happens a lot at homes. The laughter is reinforcing. So what does it tell the child? Oh, if I do this, everyone's going to look at me. So I'm just going to keep laughing. So when we think about these attention seeking behaviors, it's very important to remember that attention doesn't always mean praise. That's a very, very important thing to remember. Sometimes a scolding or like a side, like, oh, or even rolling the eyes or even doing some type of eye contact can reinforce that behavior of what the child, is seeking or wanting. Okay. So the next function of behavior is access. When a child engages in a behavior to get something they want. So this could be access to a preferred item, a preferred activity, or even to a preferred person. And here the motivation is 100% straightforward. I want that, and this behavior gets it for me. And in this example, is the child screams loudly when mom turns off the TV. And after several times of doing this, he learns that if he screams long enough, mom will go back and turn on the TV, right, to kind of stop the meltdown. And another very common example that it even happened to be with my back then like toddler is if a child is crying super loudly in the grocery store because they want a candy, and when you're like, okay, I'm just gonna go buy you the candy, so you buy the candy to calm the child down, and then boom, that reinforces a crying. So next time I know that when my kiddo goes to HEB and kiddo is crying very loudly, he knows I'm gonna give a candy, right? So again, in these examples, the screaming and the crying behaviors were the reinforcers. And guess what? It worked. A child got what he or she wanted. And because it worked once, trust me, it's going to happen over and over and over again. Okay. So the final function of behavior that we're going to talk about is self-stimulatory, or what we call automatically rewarding behavior. In other words, some of the stemming behaviors, right? So these are behaviors that a child engages in because they feel good, or also it can serve as like an internal purpose. And it's not necessarily because they want to get something or avoid something from the environment. Some examples of these are like, and I know Dr. Garcia spoke about them. It's like hand flapping, rocking, humming, tapping, or even making some type of repetitive noises. Yes, teeth grinding. Yes, thank you, Ms. Susan. So, for instance, a child may just simply enjoy engaging in loud noises because they like the sound or the vibration of it. Or in other instances, they flap their hands because it feels very pleasant, or it helps them release some type of excitement. And also, these behaviors can be motivated by sensory needs, such as seeking certain sensations, even reducing anxiety, or sometimes to regulate their own emotions. Another example is, like if a child spins in circles, it's, because the movement feels very calming and it helps them process all this like sensory input. Or sometimes you may have a teenager who hums very softly during stressful moments. And again, it serves as a way to soothe and just help them self-regulate. Okay, so now that we talked about the why behaviors, why do these behaviors happen? Now let's look at the different functions, and we're going to talk about them individually. But these are escape, attention, access, and self-stimulation. Okay, and now we're going to look at how we can encourage positive behaviors using reinforcement. So again, reinforcement is one of the most powerful and evidence-based strategies in behavior management. Very simply put, reinforcement means adding or providing something after a behavior that makes it more likely to happen again. And again, this could be anything from a simple smile to like, oh, a great job doing your homework, to some extra playtime, or even a preferred activity, or even just, like our attention. And reinforcement, it's not the same as bribery. This is very important, okay? Reinforcement is not the same as bribery. Bribery usually happens before a behavior, like saying, if you stop crying, I'll buy you candy. And I know I've done that before with my back then toddler. I've done a lot of bribery and I'm like, okay, I shouldn't be doing this. But sometimes it's just hard. Um, but reinforcement, on the other hand, happens after the desired behavior. So we are rewarding something we want to see more of. And reinforcement doesn't always have to be tangible. Like in fact, over time, we actually want to move away from rewards like toys or treats or candies. And we want to be able to move forward towards some social or natural reinforcers, like just showing a lot of pride or success, or simply just feeling good about things that they're doing right. Okay. So now that we understand what reinforcement is, let's look at the different types of reinforcers that we can actually, use. So again, remember, a reinforcer is anything that increases the likelihood of the behavior happening again. But not all reinforcers look the same, or not all of them carry the same value for every child, right? Because what's motivating for one child might not work for another. And the main goal is to always find out what's meaningful and effective to your child. Because again, what might work for Johnny might not work for Pedro, or might not work for Maria, right? And it's also very important that we use it consistently. It doesn't mean that today I'm going to use stickers and tomorrow I'm going to use quarters and then the next day I'm going to use stars. Like, it has to be very consistent. Why? Because we want to be able to strengthen that positive behaviors. So when we look at the types of reinforcers, the first one is primary reinforcers. And these are things that meet basic needs like food or a drink, right? Like a little snack, a cracker, a gummy after completing a difficult task. And primary reinforcers, they're very, very powerful motivators, especially for the younger kiddos or with those with limited communication skills. However, we want to use them occasionally, and we always want to pair them with some type of social reinforcement like praise. So we can gradually shift away from needing food as a reward. Now, we also have social reinforcers, and these involve positive attention or some type of positive interaction from others. Again, this could be just like a smile or a high five or just some verbal praise or even a nod, of approval. And for many children, feeling noticed and appreciated is enough to keep them motivated. And here the key is to make praise very specific and very genuine. And by this, I mean, for example, instead of just saying, good job, the kid's probably thinking, good job at what? What did I do a good job for or at? I want to say something like, okay, I like how you started your homework right away. And then over time, social reinforcers, they help us build confidence, independence, and even have stronger relationships. The other type of reinforcer is called tangible reinforcers. And these are items, okay? Items that the child enjoys, like a small toy, stickers, art supplies, or even like their favorite objects. And an example of this is, you're going to earn a sticker after finishing a task or getting to choose a small toy at the end of the week. And tangible rewards are absolutely fantastic. They are great for visual learners or for children who respond well to something they can see and something that they can touch. But again, just keep in mind that we want these rewards to be part of a balance system, right? We don't want them just to be like the only motivator or not the sole reason as to why a child behaves. We also want them to respond to praise, to pride, and to accomplishments. And another part or another type of reinforcers is what we called activities or privileges. Privileges. These are very much just opportunities to do something fun or something that they really prefer, like choosing the game for family time. And then I know there's several, debates about iPad, but for some, iPad time will work, even if it's just 10 minutes, or it's helping, I don't know, with a favorite chore. If I know some kids love to help around the home. And activity-based reinforcers are very effective for older children or those who value independence. So this is something great for our teenagers. And you're probably wondering why. Essentially because they teach responsibility, and it also teaches that natural, like just cause and effect, right? So for example, when you finish your homework, you can earn time to ride your bike. Or when you finish your homework, you get 10 minutes of like iPad time. And then lastly, we have tokens. And again, tokens is a very symbolic type of reinforcer. They don't have value by themselves, but they can become very valuable when we exchange them for something else. So kind of think of them like earning points or stars or tickets. So for example, a child might earn 1 star for each completed task, and then they can trade 5 stars for a preferred activity or a preferred item. And token systems are great for teaching delayed gratification. And I know this is very hard because usually kids just want to be gratified immediately. But, helping children, like when we teach delayed gratification, this essentially helps our kids learn how to wait, how to be patient, and how to plan for rewards. And I know I just said a bunch of things and I don't want to overwhelm you guys, but essentially it's just remember to start very small, right? The child should be able to earn something quickly first and then gradually work toward like just larger items.
Delaying the gratification.
Yes, delay the gratification. And I know that's very hard. Some of our kids are like, no, I want it now. Okay, so now let's talk about how to implement reinforcement effectively. Again, reinforcement is the most powerful when it's intentional, when it's consistent, and again, when it matches the child's motivation. If we are not intentional, if we're not consistent, and if we're not matching that child's motivation, doesn't matter how hard you work at implementing some of these reinforcement strategies, it's just not going to work. It truly isn't. And so here on the slide, you see 4 key, like reinforcements, or the 4 key principles, right, of how these reinforcements can work in real life. The first one is using natural reinforcement whenever possible. So whenever we can, we want to reward, right? We want for the reward to always feel natural. We want them to directly connect to the behavior. So for example, finishing homework earns playtime, or even asking politely gets help like right away. This teaches real world cause and effect, and it helps reduce dependence on some of these tangible rewards. We also have differences between bribery and reinforcement. And I know I already talked about this, but this is so important. Bribery happens after a problem starts, like saying, if you stop crying, I'll buy you candy, right? But reinforcement is planned beforehand, and it's given after a desired behavior. So for example, you can say something like, if you stay calm while we shop, you can pick a snack afterwards. And again, here the key is the timing. The timing makes all the difference. We also have like if the reinforcer doesn't work, then it's not a reinforcer. Again, the reinforcement only works if it motivates the child. If a behavior doesn't increase, it means that the reward wasn't meaningful for them. This is something very important to remember. It's very important to stay flexible. So what's motivating today might change next week. And it's always really good to kind of trace positive behaviors by catching the child being good. So make it a habit to notice and praise positive behaviors, even the small ones. A simple like comment or a simple, very specific comment like, I like how you waited, your turn, can go a long way. And children repeat what gets noticed, right? So because it goes back to that attention component. Sometimes kids just want attention. And if we're always reinforcing and praising that positive attention, they will repeat what gets noticed the most. So it's just like, make sure that the good moments are what stand out. And essentially all these little small shifts, such as like the natural reinforcement, the planning ahead, and the focusing on the positives, and of course, creating consistency, trust, And all of these creates real change, over time. Okay, so now let's talk about reciprocal play or turn-taking play. Essentially, what this means is just taking turns and interacting with another person during play. It doesn't have to be super long, it doesn't have to be super structured. It's all about gently joining the child's world and helping them enjoy back and forth interaction. So, for example, if they're playing with cars, something that you might do is, you know what, I'm just going to race, alongside them. Or if they're drawing, you can just draw next to them and comment on what you see. Within reciprocal play, um, how does this help? So it helps children by building social communication and waiting skills. We can also learn to share spaces and ideas with others. And it also makes the child just feel successful in some of these social interactions, which again can sometimes be challenging for our neurodiverse children. And this is very important. So instead of just trying to change the way the child plays, or instead of trying to make everything a teachable moment, like saying, oh, what color is the star? Oh, yeah, the star is red. Or what sound does the train make, right? Those are all teachable moments. We want to meet the child where they are. So we just want to comment on what they're doing during the play. We want to be able just to join their world, follow their interest, and use play as a bridge to form a meaningful connection. Okay, and now we're going to talk about 6 steps. So you're like, okay, well, how do I do all this, right? So these are 6 steps or ways that parents can build a connection and just encourage positive behavior during play. And it's all about observing, noticing, joining, and reinforcing what the child is already doing. So the first part is observe. We want to start very quietly, watching, what the child is doing. Notice what they're interested in and how they play and what captures your attention. And again, this helps you understand their world and, find the best time to like just join in. We want to also be able to imitate, right? Imitate or mirror their play. So again, if they're rolling a car, you can roll one too. If they're stacking up or lining blocks, you can do the same thing, beside them. Again, this shows them that you're engaged and it creates a sense of connection. You're pretty much saying like, hey, I see you and I enjoy, like what you're doing. And again, very important, we're describing, these are not teachable moments during play. As you play, you describe what your child is doing out loud. You're kind of like a sportscaster, right? Like if someone is watching football. So if your child is stacking blocks, you can say, oh, you're stacking blocks. Or, oh, wow, you made the car go super fast. We're just describing the play. And also this helps a lot with language development and it keeps your attention on the positive behaviors. We also want to be able to reflect. And by reflect, this means repeating or paraphrasing what your child is saying during play. So if your child says, the car is red, you might say, yes, a bright red car. Just anything that the child says, you paraphrase it. And this shows that, that you're listening and that you're building confidence in the communication. We also want to be able to promote some skills. So as you play, right, look for chances to promote new skills, maybe like turn taking, sharing, or even solving small, simple problems. Um, and if you see your child, right, doing any of this naturally, just point it out and celebrate it, say, oh, wow, like you waited for your turn. That was great. We also want to praise, right? Praise is a positive behavior that we use very short and we use with very specific language. So, for example, you can say, I love how gently you're playing, or you asked for help so nicely. And what is praise? Essentially, praise tells tells the child exactly what they did right, and it makes it more likely that they'll do it again. And all these 6 steps, right, are very powerful because, like they turn playtime again into those connecting, just connection time. Okay. Now let's talk about ending play. So I know that sometimes during play, a child may become very agitated or overstimulated, and like that's okay. And the goal isn't to stop play abruptly, right? But we want to be able to end it calmly and in a very predictable way. And right here with this slide, it outlines 3 simple steps. We're looking at play, leave, avoid. And this is kind of a guide to how we respond when that happens. So play, right? If the child becomes frustrated and agitated, just continue play quietly without giving attention to the negative behaviors, right? So if the kid starts yelling or knocking down, toys, you can just stay calm and keep playing very softly near the child. And again, this shows that their big reactions don't control the play, but that you're still present. Okay, the second part, leave. If the agitation continues and the child doesn't calm down, it's okay to end the play in a very gentle way. So, I don't know, you might say something like, I don't know, something very simple and something very neutral, like playtime is all done for now. We can try again later. And then you can quietly step away. Again, this models emotional regulation, and it also teaches that play ends calmly and not through a power struggle or through arguments. Okay, now the third one for avoid. So finally, right, avoid giving extra attention to the negative behavior that, that once play has essentially ended. So this means no lectures, no raised voices, just very calm, very brief communication. And when the child settles, that's when you can offer positive attention again, reinforcing calm behavior instead of reinforcing an escalation, right, or an argument. And by following these 3 steps, right, we play quietly, we leave calmly, and then we avoid reinforcing the agitation or the argument, you help the child learn that playtime is safe, that playtime is predictable, and also that it ends respectfully, even when things get a little bit tough or when things don't go our way. Okay, so I know right now we focused so much on strategies that work really well with the younger kids, and you're probably wondering, well, what about with the older kids, right? What about with the adolescents and stuff? So as children get older, right, those same principles still apply. But how we use them is the big part that changes. So for the older kids and for the teens, the focus will shift more towards a collaboration, communication, and independence. Why? Because we want to be able to help them feel that they're heard, and we want to give them a sense of ownership in their own behavior and choices. Okay, so we're still on the communication slide. Okay, so as the kiddos get older, communication becomes one of the most important areas to focus on. Many kids, right, especially those who are neurodiverse, communicate and interpret messages differently, right, because of their abstract thinking. And that also means that we as parents and adults, we have to adjust how we talk with them and not just at them. And that can make a very big difference, right? So we have things like, preferred like direct communication. Teens often respond best to very clear, very specific language instead of vague requests. For example, right, instead of saying, "Oh, could you help me, help me, I don't know, pick up around the house?" That's pretty vague, right? Which can be confusing and it can be too broad. So something that we can say is, "Please do the dishes after dinner tonight." Being direct, again, it doesn't mean that we're being harsh or that we're trying to be rude or mean. It's actually supportive because it removes that guesswork and it helps them know exactly what is expected of them. Also, when it comes to nonverbal communication, like sometimes these older kids may not always use or interpret body language or tone in typical ways, and they might have fewer facial expressions. Some of them might avoid eye contact, it might appear flat, but all of that is okay. It's very important to not interpret these as disrespect or disinterest, but instead they might just actually be listening better when they're not making eye contact. So it's very important to meet them where they are without pushing for eye contact or making them communicate more comfortable. Also, we have some intense interest. Many older kids and teens, they have very strong and very specialized interest, right? Like video games, and all of these can start, or anything that's interesting to them could be great conversation starters. So instead of trying just to shift, right, shift them to like more of a small talk, connect with them through their interest, right? And when we show genuine curiosity, this again, it builds a sense of trust, and just it opens the doors for a deeper conversation about topics later in life. Okay.
I want to just jump in and let everybody know. I realize that it's 1 o'clock and we are scheduled to run until 1, but I'm going to let you finish up, and this will be available if you have to leave in our recording. So I personally want to hear more. So I'm going to stick around. And if you would like to stick around, please do. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm
No,
trying to
you're
rush. I'm
fine.
trying to rush. So I do apologize for going over time. Okay, so now this slide focuses on staying grounded and modeling emotional regulation through our words and our tone. Some of these ways that we can do this is by staying mindful and staying calm. So you know what? Take a deep breath before responding and keeping your tone steady. Our calmness communicates, again, safety, and it communicates a lot of control, even when the other person is upset. We also want to avoid using I statements, and not like you statements. So say, I feel frustrated. I'm sorry, we want to use I statements and avoid you statements. So you can say, like, I feel frustrated when things are left undone, instead of saying, you never help, right? I
Mhm.
statements, these reduce the blame, and they make the conversation feel less defensive. We also want to keep our tone very natural, or very also neutral. So avoid raising your voice or sarcasm or criticism, right? Because again, doing these things only escalate conflict. And a very neutral tone helps the child feel that the situation is safe and manageable. We also want to restate what you hear. So reflect back on what you think they said. Like, oh, like, it sounds like you're upset. I changed the plan. So again, this shows that you're listening, and this also helps de-escalate very strong emotions that the kids might be feeling. We also want to avoid power struggles, right? If the child or the teen is very angry, don't argue, don't try to reason in the heat of the moment, because it's just not going to happen, right? Best thing to do is maybe step back, give some space, and return to the conversation once everyone is calm. And also, we want to be able to be that safe person, right? Because above all, just be someone who can stay consistent and calm. When kids know that they can express emotions without being judged, they're more likely to open up and to also regulate their own emotions. So essentially, the key point here is, when we are modeling calm, mindful communication, all of this helps children not just behave better, but it also teaches them um, how to handle emotions in a very healthy way. Okay, that's it from my part. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Garcia.
Yes, thank you, and thank you everyone for participating in the chat as well. So I just wanted to kind of summarize, autism is just a different way of developing, right? It impacts those two major areas. We know there are lots and lots of strengths to autism, but each individual is different. And when we think about behavior management strategies, right? When you think about what is the behavior that we're targeting, what's happening before and what's happening after, and that's how we can manage it. But at the end of the day, right, you all are experts in your children. You are a vital part of their decision-making teams, right? So you may go to a psychologist, psychiatrist, whoever else, to get advice or care for your child. But at the end of the day, you are an expert and you know it works. So feel free to drop any thoughts, reactions, questions. Also feel free to email me if you have any questions, or I also do evaluations. I do a lot of evaluations for folks needing the information for guardianship purposes. So thank you all. I'm happy to
I'm
answer
just putting your
questions.
putting your email in the chat box so that anyone who wants to grab it from the chat box can get it. Um, and again, you'll receive these slides later on today in your email. Some more things about Consolidated Planning Group are here at the end. If you want to see our upcoming webinars, if you would like to set up your free Zoom consultation, you can contact us. You can use the QR code. We would love to chat with you as well. So I really want to thank everybody, especially those of you who have stuck with us beyond our time today. You're going to get all of this information in your email later on. And I hope that you're going to feel comfortable reaching out to either Consolidated Planning Group or Dr. Garcia or Carmen about any questions that you have today. And if there's anything that we can do to help, we are certainly here for that. So again, thank you, Dr. Garcia. Thank you, Carmen, both for being here. I hope everybody has a wonderful, wonderful afternoon and that we hear from you soon. Bye. Thank you.